Yep.
And we're rolling. All right. Hello, everybody. Tara Baklund here with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, getting rolling tonight with a class or an interview all about Matthew Wood. Now we have classes with Matthew Wood all the time, but we don't, and he weaves in stories, but tonight is going to be all about him. I've been working on a series of becoming an herbalist at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism YouTube channel and correlating social media to help you get an idea if you just love herbs and you want to make it a profession, especially, but you just are having a hard time seeing how that can happen. These stories can really inspire you. We have probably close to 20 at this point, or getting close to it. And tonight is with none other than Matthew Wood to hear his story, how he became an herbalist. Each story is so unique and inspiring. So, welcome everybody. Those of you who are with us here in the webinar, go ahead and chime in the chat and say hello and where you're from. And if you're joining us on YouTube, know that you can still join us for the live webinar. This is where you'll also have the chance to interact with Matthew and ask your questions. So, if you'd like to still join us, you can do so simply by going to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com. And you'll see we have a number of free events going on right now. First of all, tonight's free class, Matthew Wood, how Matthew Wood became an herbalist. And we also have a free class for the upcoming musculoskeletal system class. When you sign up here, you will get access to a free class on acute injuries and also access to the upcoming Q&A, which is tomorrow with Matthew Wood and Phyllis D. Light. So you can sign up for that. You'll also get access to the recordings. And then also Matthew and Phyllis are teaching a full class on bitter herbs coming up here soon. You can register for that here and also get access to the recording. What are bitter herbs? How can they help us? Why are they a part of certain traditions like Passover and Easter meals? It's really fascinating to see how these traditions of eating certain foods, not only are they traditions, but they really have deep meaning and purpose behind them. So again, if you're with us here tonight for how Matthew Wood became a herbalist and you'd like to join us live for the webinar, you can still do so at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com and just sign up here. And while you're there, sign up for some of these amazing other free classes that are coming up as well. So Matthew was sending me some pictures because what is better than a story, but then to have pictures to go with it. And so Matt, are you ready to join us? Or are you working on sending me those
I'm
pictures?
still, uh, oops, let's see.
No problem. I
Well, I'm
can,
trying to get some photos ready. Oh, let's see now. That's a bit too much light. Um,
I can
oh,
give, if you're still working on that, I can actually give people a heads up that you have a new book coming out
yeah.
and people can pre-order this book. It is a shamanic herbal. Now, I here have it pulled up on Amazon.com, but if you just search on your favorite web browser, a shamanic herbal, Matthew Wood, you'll get all sorts of purchase options of where you prefer to buy your books. And this, some of our first classes were on shamanic herbalism very early on. You can tell what topics are your favorites because those are the ones we started with, and they're always weaved into the classes.
Mhm.
So a shamanic herbal, I think it sounds like you're very excited. I mean, you're excited about every book coming out, of course, but this one has a
Oh, this is
special place in your heart, doesn't it?
really, really great one. Yes, right. Yeah. Um, well, it's my way of thinking, really, uninhibited. There's
Anything
not.
else you'd like to say while we're here?
It's also very useful herbs for what would you say? I don't know. Changing consciousness. I wouldn't call them exactly psychological. It's more spiritual as the orientation. But it's not unlike, the Bach flower remedies or something, except I write pages about each herb usually. And then I arrange them according to their animal medicine almost entirely. Deer medicines, turtle medicines, bear medicines, wolf medicines, sun and moon medicines, and uh there's the fairy medicines, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So, oh, am I actually? No, I'm not on yet. Yeah.
Yep, we have you on video.
Okay. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, do you need a moment? Do I have the photos?
Well, that first email I sent you, and yeah, you may be. So I start with my family tree. Do you see that in that?
I'll pull that up. Starting with a family tree. So, how did Matthew Wood become an herbalist? It starts with the family tree.
Can you actually see that? Can you get that on? Yeah, there we go. Yep. Well, yes, there they are. All sorts of different people, or non-humans as well. So, but let's see. I got some old family photographs to show you guys, so we can move on. Oh, let's see. Yeah. So, uh, there's behind me. So my father's family, 10th generation Quakers. So here are, in fact, this is right at the top. That would be Stephen Rushmore, born 1763, died 1842 or 3. And there is Townsend Rushmore and Amy Willis Rushmore. We're descended from the Willises 6 times because those Quakers intermarried. My grandfather left home and said, I'll never like it too. So you're starting to get, that was her sister, another Willis. This is the family. This is the um wedding certificate of my great grandfather Henry Wood and Elizabeth Townsend King. Different another descent from the Townsends. And let's see, just today we had I had a client over who knows my parents. My dad's just recently deceased, but and by golly, it's kind of amazing. She actually was just passing out the door and she recognized this is my parents' wedding certificate. And she said, "Oh, Radnor, Pennsylvania. Well, that's where I grew up." And she was raised Quaker too. Or and so that's where they were married in 1953. And and I was born in 1954. So, and we went off to the Seminole Indian Reservation. I don't have good pictures. I think I'll send some that will present. Um, uh, and oh, darn it here. Okay, so I do have one picture then of my mom, at Okmulgee Village in the Florida Everglades on the Seminole Indian Reservation, 1956. That's my second birthday there.
Is
Yeah,
that this one?
yeah. And she's not actually Indian. She looks like it, but she's Jewish from New York City. And so there's our my you can see that Hawaiian punch in the background. This
Mhm.
is 50 miles by dirt road to the nearest town, which is like a slave labor camp in the Everglades. And okay, so yeah, they hunted tigers. I mean, that would be Florida panthers and alligators. And one of my dad's students was my dad taught at the BIA. And I do have a picture of my dad. Unfortunately, this picture part with my mom and it got badly damaged, so I'll just kind of show him there. Boom, about a couple years later. And and here they are recently, and then my dad died just a bit ago. Boom. That's still maybe 5 years ago.
It's a nice picture.
So yeah. And then various ancestors. So in addition to the Quakers, my mother's uh Jewish ancestors. This is a fascinating picture. This is um we actually know his name, Avram Hirsch. And he was a landsman and ancestor. He came from the same town in Lithuania. Boom. And then he was a peddler in the Hudson River Valley. I don't know if this was taken before or after he left Russia. And so And then my grandfather, w- my mother's father was a lifelong political radical. So how do you survive? Yeah. Well, they eventually became social workers, my grandparents, but for many years he was just they lived, just barely. I've got to close that door.
Well, family history must be very, very important to have it literally on the walls.
Yes,
Have the
not only
history on your walls.
that. But here's something really interesting. So this is a statue. I forgot the artist. Um, and there it is. Actually, this was on the um this was on the desk of Norman Thomas, who ran for president many years on the socialist ticket. Now, you might think socialists are communists, but let me tell you, nobody hates communists more than socialists because they betrayed them. But this is Isaiah breaking the plowshare swords into plowshares. So, uh, wow, that was on the desk for many, many years and given to my grandfather. Oh, well, that's most of them. Although we have that picture of the pharmacy jar of my ancestors jumping out of the pharmacy jar. Yeah, let's see that.
I'll get that going here. Were there any of your ancestors herbalists or homeopaths?
Yeah, there they are jumping out. That's the fairies jumping out of the pharmacy jar. And so I'm part fairy fae from the other dimension from the center of the earth is where we live now. So and let's see, and they do know a lot about herbs and stuff. My great grandmother and great aunt, they picked they were green pickers. I talked about that in the class on Green Thursday. And that's a little bit medicinal, but it's more just spring survival food in the old days. Yeah, and otherwise I did find I have to go way back. My that great grandfather, his brother was a doctor in Flushing, New York, and I actually found a book. I was at the Quaker meeting. They were selling doubles that they had, and I opened it up, and there was John Wood. That would be their father. Stephen Wood. That would be the physician. So I found that, and then one time I bought a copy of William Buchan's. I wanted the home remedy book for 1800 or so, and I bought. I we can take a picture and insert it, but I don't have it with me. It's at my house. I'm at my parents' house right now, and we um it so it was 1774, your basic home remedy book. And I opened it up when I got it and it was $100. I thought I want something under 100 books before 1800 because it went through 50 or 60 editions. And I opened it up and boom, there was the signature of my great grandmother's uncle and father or brother. So Pearsall's and Edmund Pryor of Oyster Bay. So so that's cool. So I do have the old family herbal of 1774.
That's that's absolutely incredible.
I know it is. Yeah. Yeah. And by that time a lot of metals and things had seeped into herbalism, but there was still herbal remedies. And there's some stuff handwritten in there from that you there are typical plants of Long Island. I think there's one recipe with frostweed, which would grow out there on the sand plains there where they lived. Um, and
How
there's another,
common,
what's that?
how common was it for families to have, their own herbal or a book like that?
Well, I think Samuel Thompson in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, probably a third of the country had his book.
Oh,
And there were other books. They became very plentiful at that time, but before 1800, before 1810, there were not very many. And William Buchan would have been the standard one. And I mean, just to show you, it's heroic medicine too. Like there's also a handwritten formula for a lead plaster. Like, holy cow, that'd kill you. But let's see, that would be for, I can't remember what they use lead for externally. So it's not all good. But okay, so So there's my ancestors and my mom and dad there growing up on the res. The first 2 years of my life, I can't remember any Muskogee, but my language patterns were fixed on a non-English language. I learned English and how to speak it after we left. And but Muskogee, that Miccosukee, that would be so they don't have the logical like if then type structure of our language, which is so that's why they'd say white man speaks with forked tongue because they didn't have that structure. They just said what is. They just described, there's a snake behind that rock, and then and then they used metaphors, snake in the grass, etc. They just say a picture that was the idea they wanted to present. And so it's a language that's more archetypal, where you think and speak in terms of patterns and um, uh, archetypes, so to speak, but just word associations. So I really couldn't speak English very well until I was about 1920 or so, and a friend of mine from high school read my astrological chart, which I didn't believe in astrology. And then I realized, oh my God, astrology is a language of energy patterns, which is really how the Muskogee, how Indian Native American languages are. And so I dropped out of college to study astrology 3 hours every day, day after day after day for a year. And after a year, I could I knew how to speak. I mean, I could talk to other astrologers, so I could at last explain my mind, but I couldn't talk to ordinary people. So then it took me another year to learn how to translate those archetypes, those ideas into ordinary English and not use them. And then I became a professional speaker. So I became a great storyteller and speaker. I also learned storytelling from my dad, really. He was like, I don't know what it is about people from Kansas, but they're good storytellers.
He was a professor as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a professor. He grew up in a small town in southern Kansas, although he had this 9 generations of Quakers, and his dad had left that world, but they sent him back to school out east. And so he got a very good education, Harvard and then Haverford, which is a Quaker school where he went to for a master's, and then um, University of Minnesota. He was a professor of special education and educational psychology. My mom was a school teacher, and after dad retired age 65, University of Minnesota, they founded the Minnesota Friends School, which is a Quaker school in Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is quite flourishing. And we'll advertise at Friends Plant Sale on May 10th, 11th, 12th. The fairgrounds is like, man, is that a good sale? Hundreds of people go there and buy thousands of plants. And it supports the school.
So this is a proper school. Or
Yeah, right.
what,
Yeah.
what what level of teaching?
Um, Kindergarten through a middle school, eighth grade, I think, maybe ninth grade, eighth grade. Maybe it's all the way. When my nephews went there, it was only to eighth grade, and I'm rather proud of my nephew, got kicked out for fighting.
Of a Quaker school? I suppose that will get you kicked out.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So he was a tough kid. Yeah, he went to a middle school then that was he was one of three white kids. And it was 1/3 Afro-American and 2/3 African, Somali. So in South Minneapolis. So he knew how to fight. And so my immediate family is very interesting still. My sister's a school teacher. My mother's 94. My dad died just a couple months ago, 94 as well. And um so let's see. So really though, to get on, that's childhood origins and um really my first mystical experience and really the guiding experience of my life, which I've mentioned several times, was we went to Quaker Northern Half Yearly Meeting in Wausau, Wisconsin. We went by train in those days. So I was born in 54. This is about 64, 65. We went by train to Wausau. And then there was Sunday school or first day school, Quakers would call it. And we went up on Rib Mountain, which is the only mountain, it's a little teeny mountain in all of Wisconsin. There's just one mountain. Francis described, he was just fascinating. He described how, yeah, there he is. And yeah, he played the fiddle. He played the songs of the soil. He had the Wisconsin state soil he lobbied for and got that so they could have something that on Earth Day and Antigo silt loam, which is just from north of Wausau, actually, as this happens. But and actually, I found when I began to read his stuff and study his stuff that he, like me, he was constantly um he didn't like logic. He liked that other way of speaking, the explanatory um and speech by what would you call it, by word plays or by different ideas. Let's see, I might be able to find um there's a great quote if I can find it here. Um uh, where it really illustrates that and how um well, let's see if I can find it. Yes. Well, so we went up and we were on that mountain and he was just telling all these amazing things about how that mountain was a volcanic core that slowly rose up over billions of years. It never erupted. It never became a bigger mountain, but all of Wisconsin and even all the way over the Twin Cities is all based on the base of that mountain. Like we would just be part of the Great Lakes. It would just be a depression here, except that that mountain rose up and supports the whole state virtually on it, all the way up to, well, the border of Upper Michigan and the mountains up there are part of the Canadian Shield, so that's a little different. But all the way down to Madison, Milwaukee, Twin Cities, really remarkable. But so here is uh here's a quote from him. Green vegetation and the ground on which we step are bathed in sunlight, but not plant roots, not our own inner light. They work in blessed, uh, they work in blessed darkness. The roots do, and so does our inner light. So, see, he's talking by metaphor or mm, by like treats like by similarity. Green vegetation and the ground on which we step are bathed in sunlight. So that's like the normal world we live in, but not plant roots, not our own inner light, which is in that darkness within. They work in blessed darkness.
Isn't
It,
inner light a Quaker concept?
yeah, yeah. So he's saying that both the plant roots and the inner light flourish in the darkness. They work in, and then there's blessed darkness. So he's saying that that darkness is blessed. That inner space is blessed. So that's really a profound. There's many different things that he's saying in that little teeny quotation. And yes, of course, he loves the green vegetation and the sunlight and the ground we walk upon. He was a soil scientist. But the plant roots growing in darkness are like our own inner light. So feeding us in our world of sunshine. So what I learned from him, so he was hopping from rock to rock and just this joy came out of him. He didn't have his violin, he wasn't playing the violin. And and he this feeling came out of him, nature is alive, nature is alive. And I knew that nature was alive. And I knew I had to believe that, or I would never again have a chance to know inner truth, because that was, in fact, my first experience of the Quaker idea of inner truth, known by inner light. And so I knew it was true, and I knew that if, in a spiritual sense, that if I didn't believe it, I would never again experience a spirit. I'd never be able to tell truth again. So that was the start both of a sense of, obligation to the inner world, to truth, inner truth, And it was knowledge that nature is a living being. And I knew all these thoughts flashed through my mind that we're all our souls, all our inner lives are all tied together in that greater, Mother Nature, in that soul of nature. I knew the world was ensouled by Mother Nature. And I knew that, so if you hurt another person, it goes back to you, you get hurt because we're all tied together. So it's like karma, but it's meant to, it just is automatic because we're all, it's not a um punishment. It's due to the fact that we're just naturally all tied together in that world. You could choose to leave that world, but that would be your own kind of the path of the hungry ghost. No, I want to do it my way. I don't want to be part of everybody else. So, um, yeah, so and I did want to show, I just because it's on my parents' wall. This was actually a copy of a photograph, but I was a very good artist, and that's Gandhi, a picture of a photograph that a guest of ours from India. I copied it, and so it's pen and ink. Yeah, just real detail. I don't have quite that patience to do that much cross-hatching with an ink pen anymore. So that's why you guys have great certificates with calligraphy and so on, because all these certificates are around the house, and um, I wanted to learn how to write that way when I was young. So, um, so then by age, I'm just, oh, here's my mom, by the way, and I'm on a class here. Oh, yeah, Raquel Wood, yes. Age 94. And healthy? Yep, healthy. Not much of a short-term memory, but healthy. Yeah. Yeah, and sadly, this photograph got torn there. Not by me. I found that around. Yeah. Yeah, right. It ought to be taped together. So,
You know what I was impressed
yeah.
by when you were telling me some of these stories before is the concept of the inner light was new to me and really I thought very beautiful. And it sounded to me like through the Quaker beliefs that that's a concept that oh, it's probably better that you explain it, but what I heard is that it was like just an inner knowing. It's knowing that everybody
Yeah.
had something special in them, maybe not special, but just their own uniqueness to bring forth into this world.
Yeah. True.
And it sounded like, with that belief, your parents were very nurturing in a sense of you being you.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So I would say to thinking back on life, like I feel like there's two things we have to accomplish in life. One is to be a good person to the greatest extent we can, and then to be ourselves, to be an individual, to actualize ourselves or individualize ourselves, as the psychologist Jung said, the psychiatrist Jung said, to individualize ourselves and so become who we're supposed to be. So, and I truly got to say, a lot of people clearly don't feel anything like that, and I feel sorry for them. It's like it's a burden to, as you know, I think, to have an inner drive that you have to manifest into the world. And that's a burden, but boy, it's way more of a burden to not have that, to um, be just aimless in the world. Wow, just an awful situation, I think. So, and if you don't have that, then just start paying attention as best you can. And yeah, so Quakers only have two dogmas, basically. Each person has the inward light, and then there's inner truth, which can be sensed by the inner light. And the way they express that is down through the ages, uh, every God manifests in every time and place. What's it called? Continuing revelation, which really is the only fair way to, it's like God, yeah, is not going to just speak one time and then, yeah, okay, you got to follow this directive here. It's more like, yeah, follow the directive you feel all the time that's always kind of beating on your head, like, pay attention. Yeah. So I guess I would have to say, this is kind of our first lesson for the herbalist, first couple lessons. Follow your inner light, do what you have to do, which may be to be an herbalist. It's hard to be a professional herbalist nowadays, but at least helping your friends and family at the very least. And then slowly that expands. And I had a client today from Ontario, and she works in a health food store, so she's not making a lot of money, but she's starting, and you learn a lot on the health food store on the floor, talking to people a lifetime. There's old people in their 70s, 80s. Not, I never met anybody in the 90s. In their store in their 80s, 86, 84. I remember some of them. Uh, let's see. I'm gonna let my mom have this room. Yeah, I remember. Oh, here's a story I heard. So there's an old guy from Bloomington named William Warrener, not the Warren family of White Earth, which is a famous Indian family, but he was part Indian. And he told this story about his grandfather owned a farm on the upper end of the Mississippi, and his wife was a Ojibwe Indian, and they hired her relatives to work on the farm. And one of the young men got sick and then fell into a coma and then seemed to be dead. And they really liked that other place to sit better. Um, but yeah, there's all sorts of little dogs running around. I mean, he's dogs just as well. I'm over here. So, so life is full of people and dogs. Yep. That's, but so the man was like unconscious, and then people thought he was dead, and so they called for a medicine woman, I think from White Earth actually, or one of those reses, and it took 6 hours to get her there, drive 3 hours there, 3 hours back, and she arrived. And they made a sweat lodge, or they'd probably already set one up. This is in the 20s. It was already illegal to do a sweat lodge, but this is like on a family farm. And they went and they brought him in, and and so William's grandmother was allowed to go in because she was part of Ojibwe, and she described what the woman did. She took so an owl, there's a gorge of an owl, like they spit up little bones and little teeny bits of mice and birds and things that they've eaten, and then they gorge it out once in a while. And so she had some of that, and she stuck it down his throat. And after about 20, 25 minutes, he started coughing, and he came back to life. Which, I mean, I thought this was like, should be a medical device, like put an irritant in the throat. Like, what's the last nerve that's alive, that's gonna keep going, that's gonna be the vagus, the both for breathing and for heart and throwing up something that you don't want. And so that's what they did, and they brought him back to life. So yeah, I don't want to tell everybody that I'm teaching and they don't really pay attention. Yeah. Okay.
So it sounds, oh, okay. I lost my train of thought with that story. I went down the story path.
Yeah.
So from the experience on the mountain, I mean, was it just that was, as you mentioned, that was you knew that that was a moment of connecting with your inner light and inner truth, and that sounds like just a really big, like the fireworks went off, everything melded, like a really deep inner knowing.
Yeah. I'd say that has been the prime directive for my life. And nature is alive. And while I love herbalism and teach herbalism as my primary thing, I always feel like underlying that is the nature is alive, nature is alive. And if I can possibly teach that, then I will be teaching that let me get out of the lights there. I will be teaching that, and that's inferred in a way. And finally, with the Institute, it's kind of the first time I've been able to, and in my books simultaneously, to start to talk about this more and more. So that was, 60 years ago, because I'm almost 70 now. So that was, but first is just to be an herbalist for a while. Well, so when I was about 31, I went back to Madison and visited Francis at his house and on the isthmus of Madison, which if you know Madison, that would be the place to be. And I set up, I called in advance, and I hadn't been in Madison. I hadn't seen him for all those 20 years, and I went and I thanked him. I thanked him for t that teaching, and I described, my experience that just this nature is alive, and how it emanated out of him, and I knew it was true. And he was very modest. He didn't say, "Oh, well, yeah, I taught you that," or something. He said, "Ah, yes, that was a beautiful day." And it was a beautiful day. It was one of those beautiful sunny days, kind of like we've had some just recently. Just beautiful, spectacular, where everything sparkles. And yeah, and then I said how I teach herbalism and I practice herbalism, worked at an herb store in those days, um and how but I was really trying to teach that nature is alive, nature is alive. And he said, "You have chosen wisely. People crave to have that connection, but they don't know how to get there. They don't know how to do that, and therefore you will always be in demand." That was like my head was spinning like, who but a Quaker elder would uh accept that you had such a bizarre path that you were following in your life, encourage you on it. I remember, and actually it would have been easier to be an astrologer, perhaps. It's a little bit more known. And I remember when I dropped out of school to study astrology, my father said, "Well, I guess if you think it's for the betterment of the world, it's okay." Well, in those days, school didn't cost so much, but so I wasn't deeply in debt from going to school. So, um, yeah, so those were the early years. Then finally, age, uh, so shortly after, so then I began to read various books. The first probably meaningful book, again, my dad, introduced me to it, The Book of the Hopi, um, by Frank Waters, and which tells Hopi mythology, all the different, the first world, the second world, the third world. We're in the fourth world, and the Hopis say we're just about to enter into the fifth world, or maybe we already have. And there's these changes of consciousness at each world. And in the last world, Spider Woman came down, created a bridge from the third world to the fourth world, and we went down that rope down into the fourth world. And I think, or maybe we came up from another world. And so that was a meaningful book. But then I read the teachings of Don Juan when I was 13. And like, so there was a guy staying at our house. We were not supposed to ask him questions because he was a runaway from the military. This is the Vietnam War, and he actually did tell me that he said, we didn't know if he's a good government agent or really a legitimate he'd been in the National Guard and he was told to fire on people, and he refused to do that, and he left. He ran away, and so there he was living in our basement or whatever for a couple months, and he gave me those little battered up teachings of Don Juan book that he passed on to me. And so I read that. That was the summer of 1967 when that book came out. It was so inspiring. Castaneda had cut out so much of the teachings of Don Juan. He didn't get it. He didn't understand it. He was trying to make it it was his PhD dissertation. A lot of people think he just made the whole thing up, but believe me, there's only little bits and pieces he made up. You can just tell the authenticity, the truth in it. And that world, Don Juan, he was an Indian mentor, really a shamanist. Oh, they didn't even use the word shaman in those days. There was no word for it, really. There was really no word. Uh, Don Juan used the Spanish word bruja, witch or sorcerer. Later, as the books kept coming out and anthropology started to, look at, they realized that these people Castaneda was dealing with, Don Juan and the rest of them were Nahualists. That's a Nahualismo. That's a, forgive the pronunciation. That's a kind of shamanic religion in central Mexico, a couple million followers. And it's a real thing, but Casnada as a group, well, they were off the edge. They were really crazy. And they did use some hallucinogenic drugs, but Don Juan didn't need to use hallucinogenic drugs to just blast Castanada's world. But that's just the that wasn't the real teachings. The real teachings for me first were to be a spiritual warrior. That was the first two books. And that means you're dedicated, you try your best, you discipline yourself, you try to be a spiritual warrior. And um uh I guess I'd say after about 10, 15 years, it's so second nature you forget about it. It's like you pick up the book, read it, and throw it away. You are a spiritual warrior by that point. So then there's other lessons, which are the Nagual and the Tonal. That's this world, the world we live in, and then the hidden world, the other world, which influences us, which little by little we become more and more able to sense. But we're always pretty much stuck in this world. And um, but so you sense it more and more. And I would say what I learned then, age 31, I experienced, so I had this, that would be probably the next major landmark. I was already working by age 29, I was working at the herb store. So let's see. Yeah, age, well, 28, 29, you go through your Saturn return, which you're reassessing your life. What do I want to do with my life? And as luck would have it, right, I got a job at Llewellyn Publications in St. Paul, an occult astrological publishing company. And it was quite a place. I can't say I totally uh, agree with their uh, emphases. It could get kind of creepy at times, the occult world. But I nurtured some of those things I was studying. I was studying astrology at that time, and and I worked there for 2.5 years. Uh, then I got psychically attacked, and it was kind of bad experience, and I quit, and I just kind of went on my own, and I started working at the herb store 1 day a week. Bob hired me, Bob Gallagher, the owner of the herb store, and so I didn't do anything for the first year. I was afraid of the FDA and all that kind of stuff. No, Bob wasn't. Yeah. Um, Bob just turned his nose at the law. And I have to say, in some ways, I learned how to take case history from him. Like you listen and you don't commit yourself and you feel, what's this person's agenda? When you know that, then it's safe. Like a couple times I turned down, I just get these people are litigious or uh I don't totally trust this person. I've never actually had anybody I felt was like a shill from um the FDA would not actually be the people, it would be more like the Minnesota uh
The-
medical, yeah, it's medical association, the people that went after and they would be very careful and launch a whole. They did this to Helen Healy, St. Paul naturopath who was licensed in Washington State, who's like related to Bernadette Healy, the bigwig Washington doctor family. And yeah, that was a mistake. That galvanized everybody, and we we would, I mean, we didn't even have a phone tree. And I remember someone said Jesse Ventura was the governor then, and his secretary said, "Could you please tell your people not to call? We can't get any work done." That's how many people, so they had to settle. The the Board of Medical Licensure, they had to settle um with us, well, with Helen. And after that, everybody felt a lot safer. I moved to Wisconsin, which still doesn't have as good a law as Minnesota does. We got the, what is it called? The Health Freedom Act. You can actually practice alternative medicine without a license in Minnesota or California or Rhode Island or a few, about 8 states. And in Minnesota, you have to give them a paper to read their rights, kind of, and California, you don't have to do that, but I moved to Wisconsin, so I'm still illegal. And but it's more like at a certain point, the sheriff, the police, they're not going to go after people. I mean, I remember this is not publicized, at what point did they stop going after alternative medicine people? In the mid 90s, they lost two cases in a row. Yeah, National Health Freedom Coalition was founded by people that were involved in that, helping Helen. And earlier, this was really fascinating. Now, by this time, I'd been a practitioner for 7, 8 years. I felt pretty confident I wasn't going to get no, but more like 15 years. And um, we met through this. Met Diane Anderson, who, with another doctor, lawyer, had defended Herb Saunders, who was a dairy farmer down in southern Minnesota. So Herb, he would get a blood sample from people. He wouldn't draw the blood himself. They'd bring it to him, and then he'd inject it into a cow. Sometime the cow died, but then it developed immunoglobulins, antibodies to the disease the person had, and then he would sell them. And then, oh, they'd buy the cow actually because it could die, and then they got the milk. And so, well, this is pretty technological in a way. This is the kind of thing that the state attorney general and the FBI and the USDA and the CDC and and the FBI and every three-lettered organization, south of the Canadian border would go after. And so they, swooped down with helicopters and machine guns and everything and arrested him and took him into the judge. And the judge said, "So, Herb, you got cows to milk tonight?" And he said, "Yeah, I do, sir." And he said, "Well, then I'll let you go on your own recognizance." Because he knew he'd like lose $100,000 if he just let his cows die from not milking them. So he was stuck to the farm. That was one way to keep a person from jumping bail. And so they brought the case, and there's an old English law. You guys should know this, that if the jury disapproves of the law, does not agree with the law, that's grounds for acquittal. Um, so that, yeah, the person's guilty of the law, but we don't approve of the law. And actually, the very first person to ever be let go on that was George Fox, the founder of Quakerism, 1660 or so, that he actually told the jury, it's like, this is like crazy to put people in jail because of what they believe or to sentence them, this is a time period when, an Italian visited England, and he said, "Wow, in Italy we have one religion and 60 sauces. In England they have 60 religions and one sauce." I don't know who was better off. But at any rate, so the jury let Herb off, and then they tried him again, and this time just one jury member out of six would not convict, and then the next time the whole jury did not convict. So after that, the the state attorney general knew it was a waste of time. Who was Humphrey, Hubert Humphrey Jr. He knew it was a waste of time. The police, the FDA, similar thing in the early 90s, a little before that, the they went after a Amish farmer, like an Amish farmer, Southern Indiana, um, Solomon Wiki, and they had a long drawn out trial, and that nobody would convict him either. So it was like a change of consciousness. It's like, well, no longer, we don't think that people ought to be convicted um for practicing medicine without a license if they're not like killing people. And um and like similar, like I remember a interview on the radio I heard with the sheriff of Sonoma or Mendocino County, and he said, yeah, this was about 2012. He said the last time we got a conviction for growing marijuana with no arms or violence involved was 2002. We can't get it now. So we only go after people who have weapons and are violent and stuff. You know, um, I'd say they would go after the Mexican cartel and things like that. They still do that. But it just was a change of attitude. And even though, cannabis was illegal, you couldn't get a conviction anymore in a place like that. So that was the beginning of a change for that particular issue. So yeah, I feel, it's like nowadays, and I gotta say, I just gotta be editorial. There's all these young kids, of course, older people were always complaining about them, but I'm an herbalist and I can do this or that, and they take a year of herb school and then they found their own school and they've never even practiced and they barely know anything. And yeah, maybe after 10 years they'll know something, but yeah, we had to worry every day we looked over our shoulder. I remember the first 15 years that I practiced herbalism, every single day I was worried when I woke up that I'd be arrested. And a naturopathic friend of mine, he said, "Oh, well," and back when they were illegal too, he said, "Oh, well, I just moved to another state if they arrested me." Yeah, that's states' rights. That's true. That's one way to handle it. So, I suppose my computer is jumping around all the time. Actually, I don't hear any noise out there when the dogs have been walked, and I thought that was a much better place to sit.
So it
Better.
sounds like your transition from astrology to herbalism was when you were working at that astrology publisher, and then you started working 1 day a week at present moment, Herbs and Books.
Well, yeah, while I was studying astrology, I couldn't figure out whether to be an astrologer or an herbalist.
Mm.
And really it was I eventually realized it was to be an herbalist. And um so that did take some I needed to, and I don't do astrology that much anymore. I certainly look at a chart. I can read a chart okay, and I don't go out of my way. I should take the people's information down when I do a consultation, but I just don't. It's not how I don't think that rigidly into the horoscope. I just use that language. The mints are very Libran or Venusian, and the oak tree is very Saturnian. And I remember freshman year, last end of freshman college, that oh, there's little dogs there. That I remember that uh, my freshman botany teacher, I gave a presentation. I still couldn't speak very well. I was just learning astrology then. And he said, "Well, you weren't a very good speaker, but you really understand the essence of that plant." And I was like, "Wow, he really gets it." It was bur oak. It was the oak, good old Dr. Lawrence.
Oh, if you
And
need a picture of that, I'll pull that up too. Is that here?
yes, there's Dr. Lawrence. There's his class. There's me in the middle with the bike there. And yeah, that's on an herb walk, or I don't know, a plant walk, I suppose they called it. And April or May. And yeah, like I described how the bark is thick and very protective, and how the root system is twice as big as the above ground part of the tree, which is something I learned from him. And how very kind of conservative, and the tree grows, and it if there's a prairie fire, it's what grows out on the edge. It's the last tree before the end of the forest with the poplar. The poplar, if it burns down to the ground, just starts up again from the roots. The bur oak, if it's burned year after year, finally it will rise up. And I mean, finally, after 13 years without, um, yeah, could we put the dogs back upstairs there? Okay, yeah, good. Yeah. So after 13 years of not being burned in a fire, the bark gets thick enough that it will not get killed by a prairie fire, and then you have your bur oak out there in the middle of nowhere. And so this is where you get these great famous council oaks that they'd meet in Council Oaks, Iowa or Texas, where the tree is huge and still alive after hundreds of years, and these single trees that would be out on the edge of the prairie from Texas to Winnipeg, that's the and all the way east to Vermont would be and the bur oak out to Wyoming. So that was a tree I loved, and I understood it. And yes, I use, well, we tend to use white oak bark as the herb, but it's astringent, very toning to the uh yeah, to the veins. So it's a good venous tonic. It's a good hemorrhoid tonic. And Dr. Bach, he tuned into the tree too, and English oak, and he said it's kind of for I always say it's for the people who fight on against adversity and never give up, but never succeed. And so, well, they succeed after 13 years, that particular oak, but it's this on and on. So people that try to out integrity the situations of life. And my friend Susan, who died recently, who I talk about all the time. So she got bucked off a horse and bruised up, and her veins just across the chest were like, whoa, they were really purple and black and expanded. That's like an indication. Purple black veins is like what oak is. So I gave her that, and a week later she said, "Oh, I understand this herb teaches you the to understand the battles you can win." So the battles you can win are was not that horse. She never tried to ride him again. But that horse she kept because she and he like she wasn't a full-fledged horse whisperer, but she could talk to that horse and he could talk to her, and that horse would tell her what the other horses were worried about. But one time a real horse whisperer came out, and she said, "Holy cow!" He could just like those horses were like, "Whoa!" But you could talk to us, you know.
That would
So
be so neat to witness,
yeah, yeah.
or even just hear about secondhand from the people who witnessed it too.
Yeah, actually, an obscure class we still have. I think those classes was Sarah Annan from New Mexico, where she talks about kind of about horse shamanism. They're free, they're in our library. Boy, is that rare, peculiar, strange stuff that nobody, I'm not in touch with her right now either. So I don't know anybody else who knows about that kind of stuff. Although I taught Susan could verify most of it from talking to her horses. Um, for Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Sarah described how each type of there's only four colors of horse, and basically there's a fifth mysterious, the paint or the medicine hat horse, and that has yet spiritual powers. But at any rate, so yeah, so you learn all these strange things along the way. So I'm learning animal medicines as well as herbs. I worked in the herb store 8 years for Bob there, and I learned an awful lot. And homeopathy. I was studying homeopathy and gravitated more towards herbalism. He was studying herbalism and gravitated more towards homeopathy. And he said, no two herbalists are ever going to be alike. We're all different by nature. There's no standard. He said, so he quoted Chairman Mao, let 100 flowers blossom, 100 different ways to be an herbalist. Of course, Chairman Mao killed all the flowers in the, what was that? The Gang of Four, um when in 1976 when they killed all the professors and students and everybody and set back the education of the Chinese like
And we're rolling. Oops.
whoops. Yeah. We're still rolling. Okay, so life at the store, and I would say after about so I met some interesting people there. Arlo Omaha, a Lakota Indian, like Contrary. He was a lot of fun. Susan, my friend Susan, who came into the store, who was dying really of Crohn's disease, and we kept her going, Bob and I both, and she just died. I remember she was about 35 then. She said, "Well, I won't be alive in 20 years," but she lived another 37 years. She died just last December, age 72 or 3, and um. She was like a dimension shift. I mean, really, that was her. She was a dimension shift. You didn't experience, she didn't experience the reality all stuffed into a little box that most of us experience. So, um, yeah, what's a good Susan story? There's so many, but I've told we have a thing on that in the library too. We have an interview of Susan by me, and then a little bit of additional storytelling, a few things that got left off of that. But
Actually on YouTube. There's so much content on YouTube as well.
okay, that should be, yeah. Yeah. So, um, she was an exciting person. I always think of, I've told the story about 5 times in the last couple months since she died because it's such an example. But we were driving along, we were going to a pipestone quarry, and and there was the clouds going from northwest to southeast, just the normal way clouds go in the Midwest. And there was this one little cloud going the other way. Just this little cloud, after 5 minutes, most clouds have disappeared, but there it was still there. It was going the other way. And Susan said, "Hey, there's a contrary cloud there." And so, uh, and then all of a sudden, I was in the driver's seat. The window was down a little bit. She was over on the other side. It was a little bit cool still. And all of a sudden, she says, "Oh, that cloud bit me." Like, it wasn't like, I think that cloud bit me. There's a big welt. It's on the other side, a big welt. And we just gone to Buffalo farm and bought a bunch of buffalo patties. So I said, "Here, take this, stick it on there, absorb it out." That's one way to take a hamburger patty and put it on the welt for an insect bite. I don't know for a cloud bite, but it worked. And she said, "Yeah, I said something bad about the peace pipe." Yeah. So. Yeah, and Arlo too. I remember I've told this story recently too, but I'll tell it again. So, yeah, Arlo. So he was a day late he was supposed to lead the Sundance. He was the leader and he was a day late. Nobody knew where he was. "Where's Arlo?" And they called his daughter, and his daughter said, "Well, the only thing I know for sure about my father is that he's my father." And and then the next day he came and he showed up and said, "Oh, my cousin put the colors up in the right directions, the Lakota contrary way." So I learned from that then the colors are in different directions for the contraries than from the normal set of directions. And so I think everywhere from South Dakota to Minneapolis, if anybody mentioned his name, it was a chuckle or a laugh. And he'd say things. He was like Cassandra. He would say things. He spoke that way. He didn't use logic. He would describe something exactly, and that was it. You didn't, it's like, he didn't say, "Well, because you did this, that will happen." He never did that. He would give a similar experience, and and it would take me like 20 years to understand what he meant sometimes.
Did he give
So
a story, and so you'd have to infer from the story what the message was?
yeah, yeah, that's how he would do it pretty much. Yeah, it might not be quite, it wouldn't be a long story, just a couple sentences maybe. Yeah, but it would be analogous, but you might not make the connection. So, and one time, and then Indian elders, he was really crazy. He was young in those days. When we met, we were in our 30s, and it was like we already knew each other. And he said, did, did I meet you somewhere? Were you in the army, Yeah, like I told this story too. So he was in the army and he started hearing voices. So they reported him to the psychiatrist. And finally he got an honorable discharge after a year. And and then he started getting these checks, like half a government, it was an army or it was whatever, veterans check for so 50% psychosis. And year after year he got this check, and that's what he lived off of. And then finally in his 50s or late 40s, he had a rough period and he was living in the street and he got on drugs and alcohol and he must have been acting crazy. And they took him to St. Peter's, the mental hospital of Minnesota, to evaluate him. And he was there for a month and against his will. And he called me up. He was really afraid. He called his senator. He called everybody he could because he's afraid they're going to lock him up. But they don't lock crazy people up anymore. They just put them on drugs and turn them out on the street. Well, they turned him out on the street and no drugs. And the next check came and it said 100% psychosis.
Oh, wow.
And it doubled the amount he got every month. And he brought it in and showed us at the herb store. And Bob, the owner of the store, he said, "That's some chisel you got there, Arlo."
So how
Chiseled him.
many of the stories that you have, I mean, you have so many just like out of this world stories. How many of them center around, or what percentage center around present moment? Like if you hadn't been there, how many things would you have missed out on?
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. And those were the glory days when there was just one crazy thing after another, people coming in. And there were crazy things at present at Llewellyn Publications too. I remember one time there was a woman there. It took us, it wasn't until she quit and we put two and two together and well, I don't want to say she was a Scorpio in a bad way, but she was. But like there was somehow one of the copy editors she got mad at him and he came to work and he was always into his coffee cup. His coffee cup was like every day at coffee break. I was like, me and my coffee cup. And he came in and this woman, we believe, had stuck all these razor blades in his coffee cup.
Yeah.
Oh, golly. And
Those
so,
Scorpios that give Scorpios a bad reputation.
yep, yep. Well, I hear tell now that they're picking on Geminis, which that's not fair.
Well, that's
Uh,
what I was going to say is it sounds like all the goings on kept your Gemini self entertained.
yeah, yeah, there was so much stuff in the herb store. Um, yeah,
So
uh,
when did the your first book come into play in this timeline?
that'd be 1987, 1985, 87, 86 or so. Seven herbs, plants as teachers. And so lucky me, my cousin Julian Winston, it's my mother's first cousin. Oh, well, he was a homeopath, not a practitioner, but really a social lubrication well, he was a Renaissance man and a genius. So he was a art. There's art on that side, and like I said, there's art in the family. And he was a professor at the Philadelphia College of Art and Design, and he was a race car driver and a handgun collector and a homeopath, and he built his own pedal steel guitar, and then he wrote the book. There's only one book ever written on how to play the pedal, how to build the all about the pedal steel guitar because it's really like it was built by like Appalachian hillbillies with car parts and stuff, and you got to either be in that type, you got to be a mechanic, but he was a college professor, art designing, mechanical things, so that was his kind of instrument, you know, and he was a good musician. He was on Country Joe and the Fish on that album. Julian Winston, you can look him up there. Winnie Winston. Um, but he he was involved in that whole folk music thing, like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, all that era. That was his era, beatniks, and but then so he became a homeopathic. He had great stories too. I mean, crazy good, interesting, and he'd first time he ever heard of homeopathy. So he's camping in Western Pennsylvania and he gets poison ivy and he goes to the local doctor in a little town there and and the doctor says, well, I can give you what the regular doctors give, or I can give you what the smart people take, which was the homeopathic remedy, which worked right away, probably Grindelia tincture or something like that. And the other people took the cortisol, or maybe it was just a calamine lotion or something. And so then he began to study it. He learned from that. And um some stories about him. Yeah, he cut two of his fingers off with making a homeopathic home remedy kit in his basement because he was an industrial design professor. That's what he was. And and they were hanging by the skin, so he wrapped them up and went to the hospital. And he put calendula on and St. John's wort, and they sewed him back on. He was in his 50s, and they said, "Well, you're in your 50s. Your body doesn't grow as fast, and in 3 days you'll know whether they take or not." But they took perfectly. He could still play the mandolin, and he yeah, and so it was a complete recovery.
Wow.
He and he always had the most beautiful girlfriends, I got to tell you. But he married for love. He finally and it really went out of the way. He had moved to New Zealand, his because she was a homeopath, and they married and lived down there for quite a while. And I remember him saying, "Yeah, he cut himself down there, and the doctor came, house call, and then he charged him $12." There must have been some government thing, but he said, "Yeah, compared to our American." medical system. And so yeah, Julian was something else. So he turned me on to homeopathy. I got the address for to get my first homeopathic home remedy kit from him. And meanwhile, an old guy had died who had a huge homeopathic library, and I got half of his books, and another friend of mine got the other half. And we had all these great, great homeopathic books and to study, and I studied all the time. And my parents had a guest over, and here's this huge bookshelf through full of homeopathy books. And he said, "Wow, I've never seen a bookshelf full of books on a subject that I'd never even heard of." But um, Julian, this was hard mail. I sent him a letter, and he sent me the address for Borky and Taffel, the oldest pharmacy in the country, and they were the homeopathic pharmacy. And I was just getting ready to send off my money to get a kit, and my dad said, "Oh, get me one of those kits too. My Uncle Rushmore had one of those." I said, "What? What? I didn't know that your uncle had a homeopathic home remedy kit. Like, wow, that's like news to me." And in fact, yeah, in that family, yeah, yeah, not that far back, but a couple generations in between me and them, they they did homeopathy, and my grandfather was delivered in 1900 by a Quaker homeopathic physician, and there was a guy in our meeting who came from Trenton, New Jersey, and his mother came to visit, and his grandfather had been a Quaker, a homeopathic Quaker physician in Trenton, New Jersey. And I said, "Oh, well, maybe he was the one who delivered our grandfather." They were cousins, it turned out. First cousins, my grandfather and his grandfather. And she said, "Oh, well, I have the medical records. I'll go look it up. What's his birthday?" And she looked it up. This is like 1985 or so for 1900. She looked it up and she said, "Yeah, he was the family physician, but on that day he was gone. So the baby was delivered by his best friend who was a Quaker homeopathic physician." And that was a whole little world that's gone now, but the Quakers, they were their own little world, and they were so interbred, intermarried that the greetings when you ran into another Quaker were, "Hi, cousin."
And you were cousins.
They were all, "Yeah, I know, right." He was like, there was only three families descended from old Quaker families, and yeah, we were all related. All the other family was more distantly related, but yeah. Yeah, and even my cousin Julian, one of his gorgeous girlfriends, was like, a Burnham. I said, "Is that from Hartford, Connecticut?" "Wow, your family owned our family, owned the Rushmores, that the people on the Stephen Rushmore." Yeah, they were, well, indentured servant. Actually apprentice, I'm pretty sure, which is not quite so much an indentureship, but an apprenticeship. But they're your master, you know. And the record says, the old record, it says Thomas Rushmore, Thomas Burnham is bound for 10 pounds to make sure that his man, Rushmore, does not cause a riot in the church again. So, yeah, those Quakers getting into trouble.
What do you think? What do you think a riot is in the Quaker Church?
Oh, this is the Congregationalist. This was the meeting house. This is the Puritan meeting.
Oh,
So,
it's a Puritan mean. Okay, so it can get a little bit more out of hand.
well, it almost certainly meant he didn't believe in child baptism. That's what usually that was a big deal and to someone like that. But he got his hands swatted, I'm sure. Yeah, so okay, so finally I'm working at the herb store. My cousin, I get the kit. My dad's used that kit. He just died at age 94, so that was like, wow, that was like 60 years he used that kit. Not quite, no, more like 50 maybe. 30, 40, 40 years he used that home remedy kit.
Wow.
And my mother too, and she's not as much into it, but I remember my sister dropped her son off. He was like about a year old. He's like sniffling and crying, like whining a little bit, and oh, oh, oh. And she walked out the front door, and I walked in the back door, and my mother says, "Honestly, that sister of yours, she doesn't use homeopathy when she should." And and she goes and she gets chamomile, which is for whining babies, you know, and gives it to Avram, and he's like, "Oh, oh, oh." It's like, and I was so impressed that my mom had that much confidence. This will take care of that, you know. So never put up with a whining baby of any age, friends. You wanna you want to get rid of that. So
Have your chamomile on hand.
Yes, right. And anybody can whine some, so you got to watch out. Even if you live by yourself, you might want to have some on hand.
When you get sick of yourself whining, then you know it's really up to here.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Would you
Uh,
like to take some questions?
yeah, okay. So that's just the beginning of my career. Uh,
Yeah.
to just say real quickly, 8 years at present moment, started seeing clients, and a couple of years at Crescent Terra Chiropractic Clinic in St. Paul, and then maybe 10 years on my own, and then I don't know, by that time I've been, that was 30 years, by 25 years by that point, and now I'm just out there in the jungle of rural Wisconsin. Maybe I've been practicing about 40 years now, and I don't make a big deal of it. I just, whoever looks me up, and I would say there's a lot of good practitioners, so I'm good at some things. I'm not the best at other things, so.
I think
Okay,
that's
question.
the beauty of herbalism. And as you know,
Yeah.
the, the trade has grown or the art has
Yeah.
grown. We really do have specialists.
Yeah. And that's another thing, attunement, like it's totally abolished in regular medicine, but in alternative medicine and herbalism and acupuncture and stuff, it's like by attunement. Oh, I think I like that person or something. It's like follow those intuitions. Work with the person that you feel drawn to. And also, you as an herbalist, as you develop, you will attract the community that's normal to you. Like if you're a housewife with some young kids, you'll end up helping all these other housewives with their kids, and then that will become the basis of your practice, maybe. And or maybe you'll just be teaching other moms, etc. So I worked at the herb store, and there was plenty of weird people, like, or just those weird stories like William Warren, or the old story about the medicine woman in the Owl Gorge, and um like uh I I would end up with all the weirdos because that's just who I was, And people say, "Where do you come up with these clients?" And I say, oh, I didn't at first I didn't realize anything was unusual. Later I realized, oh, this is my community. So yeah, yeah. And another thing, if you don't want to worry about the FDA, then like look like an idiot. Practice astrology, with your herbalism, have long hair, don't, just look like a hippie herbalist in a little crazy little store. Um, yeah. So it's if you try to look like a doctor that they'll go after you. Yeah. So,
Good
all
advice.
right,
It's so
question.
funny. Great. Charles asks, what prompted the writing of holistic medicine and the extracellular matrix?
Yeah, that one was out of character, wasn't it? Let's see. So, um, I in 2002, 3, I did get my Master's of Science degree. I had nothing better to do but go off to Majorca and Scotland and get in this program and meet 8 times over 2 years and write papers and get my degree in herbal medicine. And I learned science, how to read papers a little bit better, and I began to appreciate that. And so holistic medicine came along. Actually, was a naturopath in Seattle, Nancy Welliver, said, "Oh, look at this book," and it was by Pissinger and Heine, published by my publisher, Richard Grosinger, North Atlantic Press. In the old days, he ran that press, and I was like, wow, the extracellular matrix, and I read it and I read it, and I realized, well, this guy, they have proved that holistic medicine is the real thing, that it's not the cell does not control its own destiny. It's the environment that controls the cell. And Pissinger, people asked him, well, how about the single cell in the ocean? Isn't that, an independent life form? And said, no, its regulatory system is the ocean. And so our environment, and this is something we should remember as people, our environment is our regulatory system. It really limits us, if we're going to pollute it, etc. We could go down with it. And but at any rate, so the extracellular matrix is the environment of the cell, and um like you stick the needle in the acupuncture needle and it is felt in other parts of your body because the matrix, it's like a lightning bolt goes everywhere. It's actually not, it's a different way of electrons moving. It actually is more like lightning than like a nerve. Yeah, so the electrons move along the fibers, kind of like the atmosphere, boom, and in a second, less than a second, the whole body has responded. It's like, oh, he just ate some salt. It's like, oh, we just had some more water. Yes, we want water. Give us water. The whole body's reacting all at once. More water, more. And um, so it is a holistic, we react as a whole. And that's what really forced me to write that book. Also, I realized that the Matrix was, well, there was more to it. The Matrix was the primordial beginning organ system of all. Like, first there was a cell, but that's very different from us, a unicellular organism. Then the self-enclosure, like sea slime with an enclosure around it. And that's the multicellular organism. And that space within the enclosure, and I guess the enclosure too, is the first organ system. That is, so that's like the synovial membrane around the matrix. The matrix is the first organ system, and I could not really, because as a holistic thinker, I couldn't understand anatomy and physiology until I understood that organ system. Then it was like, oh, I get it now. It all grows up out of there, and the next organ system is the connective tissue system. Like it's kind of like the continents rise up out of the ocean to the bones rise up, the tendons, the harder substances, the joints. The first are just fibers. The collagen rises up out of the matrix to become the connective tissue system, which is like, like a jellyfish has a little connective tissue, and then or mostly just membranes, and then a starfish has a more connective tissue, almost like a moving bones. And then on and so on. I haven't really gone, what is the third organ system? I don't know, but it'd be interesting to keep on going like that. But that helped me then be able to personally understand physiology and anatomy because it now made sense. Also, by the end of the book, I realized so I never felt confident treating cancer. Well, nobody feels confident treating cancer, but I never felt like I had any kind of overview of the topic. It was my least favorite topic for trying to treat. It was like guesswork. Oh, I know that red clover works. I mean, 100 times red clover has worked for me or veterinarians that I taught about it, and it insists the cancer, which Kissinger talks about in that book, how if you damage the matrix, you want something that will insist what's left of the cancer, or if you rip that cancer out, there might be little fragments. You want to grow the polymers all around it to trap what's left. Or even before you do the operation, you want the polymers. Well, we have an herb that does that. That's red clover. He and his cohorts introduced glucosamine sulfate to try and do that, but it turned out that was good for joint repair, because glucosamine is like one of the collagens rising out, or one of the polymers rising out of the ocean of the matrix. So, so by the time I'd finished that book, I got a little more insight into cancer, and now I'm writing. So then I did the Shamanic Herbal, then it's preview. I haven't sent it in to the publisher, but I did send it to Richard, who's kind of my agent, Richard Grossinger. Um, and I got to do the pitch. I got to write a couple pages on it, introduce it. But um, the next book is on the viruses, the immune system, COVID, and the vaccine. And I already had about 100 pages, or maybe 50 pages on the immune system when COVID started. And I just started writing down things about COVID when they came up, like January 20th, 2020, Scientific American says coronavirus is a combination of a coronavirus from a bat with snake venoms in it. Whoa, okay. And pretty interesting. And One is the king cobra, the Chinese cobra snake, two of the spikes, and the other one is a Chinese crate snake, and then the two fibers are identical to sea creatures. It's like this was not man-made. But at any rate, so I started, and first it was very interesting. How's the immune system work, and what remedies might work against COVID, and then the vaccine comes along, and what's wrong with this picture? 3 months of research, and they say that's science, like, and they're trying to suppress it. And then so studied more and more about the immune system. And really, in some ways, the whole thing kind of began also, or it re-began. I had pages on the immune system, but that first month, March 2020, I was sick, and I called up my friend Chris McPadden, who's taught for us some, who's a Ojibwe speaker, and like 30 years before this woman Priscilla had said to me, another Ojibwe, she said, "The bat people attack the Indian people through their genes." So after reading that article, I'm thinking, like, what did she mean? Like, I never asked her. You should always ask an elder if they say something. But I was too like, whoa, God, that's too weird. What if she means white people or something? Me, like, that's not what she meant. So, and then I asked Arlo, and Arlo said, yeah, yeah, she's right. He took him 3 days to check it out on the inner level. And then finally I asked Chris, and he was sick with COVID too. And he says, "Oh, I don't like talking about that medicine. That's like really intense. Yeah, that bat medicine, it can change your genes, your ancestors, your past lives, all under the level of consciousness where you're not aware of it. So it's like really, ugh, threatening. And that's a lot like what was going on with COVID. And we did a class, me and Amanda, you can look that up too, Holly and bat medicine, because Holly's a bat medicine with those little leaves with the spikes. And she and I had both accidentally, well, had discovered that that was a very good remedy for us personally with COVID. And so, so that kind of became, so the first chapter of that book, which may be called, that may be the title of the book, is Gift to the Bat People. Because the bat people, so then also, early in the epidemic reading, like from Zach Bush, the MD, who's a real Mother Nature evolutionist, he said, yeah, every virus is like an evolutionary push. And it's a new lesson to be learned. What do we got to learn here? And then I realized, oh, the bats like harbor, like there's thousands of viruses that live in bats. They coexist with bats. It's like the viruses created a homeland in the bats, and the bats like nixed off 10 different immune things that we use. The bats got rid of, and they just maintain a slightly higher temperature. So they keep the viruses under control with just a little bit extra heat, and that's their immune system more is a little different from all the other mammals. Well, so gift to the bat people, they're constantly challenging us to move ahead. They're the source of these viruses that like, and yes, there are viruses. I don't care. All those people say, oh, there are no such thing as a virus. I address that in that first chapter. That is just, I don't want to be insulting because I like Tom Collins' work on the heart, but man, it's just it's a delusion. Like, um, at any rate, I address that. So look forward to that book in about 2 years, and um, so and it's like, yeah, Priscilla taught me that gift to the bad people. I'm not gonna. I believe in the viruses because these Indian teachers taught me. They didn't have a microscope, but they knew that that existed. They knew the bat people were constantly raying out the viruses. Almost all of them have come through bats first, then to the animals and to the plants. So that is that book, and it's about 98% done at this point. And but between that and the book um uh on the Matrix, I began to see, oh, this is how cancer works. It like the matrix is weak and it spreads in the matrix. Oh, so you got to strengthen the matrix. Or there's various immune factors that get turned off that stop controlling. The natural killer cells are like, yeah, we got self-identity. We don't like you. You're a virus, you're a bacteria, you're a cancer cell, you're a cell that's turned cancerous. We're gonna tell the we're gonna tell the other guys to beat up on you. And that's self-identity. And the natural killer cell ought to be called the self-identity cell. But and there's tumor necrosis factor, and there's all sorts of different, all the crazy little things that all these T cells and B cells and macrophages, and they're all are doing. They're controlling cancer as well as all the bacteria and the toxins and the antigens and the allergies and the viruses. So that's that book. And all I can say is, like, I know this, there is not another book for the popular market, and even hardly a book for the professional market on the Matrix. It just, it's so hard to conceive that, and I quoted a woman scientist who said the main problem with the Matrix is it's hard to conceive. It's hard to visualize it. Yeah. But so I wrote it, so we're out in advance. We know that holism is real. We know that the Matrix is important. And um and we know we're right due to that. And with the immune system, I hope to advance that some. But I gotta say, I'm a layperson. I'm not that well trained as a scientist, and I don't think that way normally. I'm thinking down in the Everglades with the alligators and stuff instead. So alligator medicine, yeah. And so I don't. So well, that book will be out in about 2 years. So I can't guarantee. I feel like, yeah, but nobody'd written a book on the Matrix, so they can criticize me all they want. But until they've done it, they don't have anything to criticize. And my hope is that some allopath, some scientist will read my book and imitate it and copy it all for scientists, and then they'll get it. So, all right, next question.
That's a nice wish. That's something in the years that I've worked with you, I've noticed you're very generous and in giving, and I think well intentioned, if I may add that as well.
Yeah.
How about a few more? How about, so Judy's wondering, so your mother grew up in New York City, or did she migrate there, or and what borough is
Oh,
she from?
she grew up in Brooklyn. Yeah. Yeah, and because her father was he was like the head of the War Resisters League in World War II. So unpopular. So every every fall to spring they lived in Brooklyn. Then in the spring they went out and lived in Westchester County with these two little old ladies, spinsters, like lesbians or something. Tracy and Frances. There's actually papers about them. And so they got to stay with them, save for the rent, and then they started up again in the fall and lived there through the spring. And my grandfather, he was secretary of the War Resisters League, which was founded by Jessie Hewen, who was a feminist, communist, New York City teacher. No, maybe she was a socialist. I don't know. Sometimes people label people wrong that way, but she couldn't move ahead in academia. When she finished her PhD, her professor said, "Well, you are like totally top of the class, but I could never recommend you for a job because you're a socialist." So, but that was my grandfather. He was like, "Yeah, I'm a socialist," and so and she knew that the War Resisters League had to be headed by a man. And here's a story too, I gotta tell you. So there's all these fascinating stories. So after World War II, so some of the conscientious objectors did not get conscientious objection they did not pass. The US just threw them in jail, and they went to a jail in Kentucky, federal prison, and there was a bunch of them, and they went on a hunger strike because they wanted to desegregate the jail, which is like 50 years ahead of time. But and well, not 50, maybe 30, 40. And then finally the hunger strikes. Finally the head of the prison, he said, "Well, these crazy, I'll throw if they want to be desegregated, they can have that wing of the prison over there and be desegregated." Okay. So So they learned passive resistance and hunger strikes. And one of them was Bayard Rustin, who was a black guy who grew up in, yeah, right near Radnor, where my parents were married in Westchester, Pennsylvania. And although he was African Methodist, he went to the Quaker high school there because that's where everybody went. George School, where my great grandfather went, and he and where Francis Hole went, and it's like the Quaker Hogwarts, and so he learned all about passive resistance. And then when the civil rights thing started, so he did an experiment. He got on a bus and he went down to Nashville, and then he got on a public bus and he sat in the front, and they said, "You can't sit there. That's for white people only." And he said, "Well, yeah, okay, well, you got to throw me off the bus, So the bus driver had to manually throw him off the bus, and a lot of the white people clapped actually for him. So for him, not for the bus driver. So he's like, "Oh, okay." So he was one of Martin Luther King's lieutenants, and he was really the only one who really understood nonviolence. And like, there's a good biography of him. Very interesting person. And in addition to being black, he was gay, which really all Martin Luther King's lieutenants were like, "Oh God, we don't want to get in trouble because he's gay, and stuff." So, and but so him and some of these other guys who'd gone through the prisons and stuff, they they were in the War Resisters League still, and they had a big fight. And it was my grandfather with the old guard who was like, "No, Jesse Hewlin's vision is that we just work for conscientious objectors. We're not trying to do civil rights or anything. That's another thing." These other new guys, "No, no, we're doing civil rights. Um, we're gonna do passive resistance, etc." And the young ones won, of course. It's a big schism. It's a bunch of uh, progressive, crazy liberal types, beyond liberal, socialists, whatever. So, but so that was interesting. That was the end of my grandfather's career is in as a professional radical. So, yeah. So that's Brooklyn. All right.
So what's come up often in the series of becoming an herbalist, interviewing people, it has come up similar to what you were saying, the inner light and the inner truth. And that does seem to be a theme. Everybody says it a little bit differently, but
Wow.
there's definitely an aspect of following your heart, following your inner guidance, that sort of thing. All along your journey, was it ever, I remember you telling the story that high school classmate who did your astrology chart was the one that said you won't be content or something like that
Yeah.
until the book.
Until you've written a book. Yeah. And that was the second one I knew, oh, astrology is real, although now I'd realized, well, people could, have a psychic attunement. But even that, because I didn't know until that moment that that was true. I didn't know that I would never feel, I wasn't conscious of that I would never feel fulfilled until I had written a book. And that book was the Book of Herbal Wisdom. It wasn't my first book, but when that book was done, I had expressed what I knew I had to express, what I felt I'd come into the world to express, which is that every plant has its innate archetype personality, and out from that raise the emotional, mental, psychological, spiritual, physical properties of the plant. And I was able to convey that through in that book. And then when I finished, it's like, oh wow, golly, I'm gonna be able to write again. I don't know. And when I met Judith Hill when I was in my well, we were in our 50s, I suppose, or I was. And she said, "Have you finished your life purpose?" I said, "Yeah, I guess I have. It's all gravy from this point on. I just teach herbalism because I love it. And it's not, we were already, maybe it was already in my 60s. I don't know. I think I was already teaching we'd founded the Institute. And she said, "Yeah, well, I can tell. Again, astrologer, they can just read these things. Yeah, I could tell there's some deep relaxation in you. Like you don't have to do that to prove that point. You've already done it. It's like you're leading like the life of Riley." And I was like, yeah, golly, that's true." So from astrologer to astrologer. Yeah, that's pretty
I feel
interesting.
like I kind of know the answer to this, but I'm saying it just to kind of point out a pattern
Yeah.
of all these interviews. Have you ever really planned out your herbal path and all your, I'm going to be here at present moment. I'm going to start my own practice. I'm going to write these books. I'm going to start an institute.
No, not very much. Like I just hung out in the herb store some and Bob just said, "How would you like to work one day every other week?" It's like, yeah. Like every other Saturday, every other Thursday, because that's when he had um child he had the mother had 6 days a week, he had one day a week. Yeah. And so yeah, I started with that and went on from that. I guess I did by that time I determined I want to be an herbalist, not a uh astrologer. So there was some evolution and some decisions, but doors kept on opening, and Bob opened that door and Julian showed my first manuscript to Richard Grossinger and Dana Ullman, who's a bigwig in homeopathy too, and they published my first book, and I really never had to worry about publishing ever since. And Richard says, "Oh, my publisher now," he works for the publisher. He says, "Oh, they'd publish anything you wrote." And Oh, okay. And I was listening to a show about writers yesterday on the radio, and they were frustrated about, yeah, nobody will read my manuscript and this and that. And it's like, God, I mean, they wanted to publish that before. It was even a pre-manuscript that wasn't done yet that they already were interested in. And so, yeah, it just kept on moving ahead. But and so one has to say, if you are following that inner light, you will be supported wherever you may be. There's a great quote in the Shamanic Herbal from the Book of Hermes. There's just a great quote where Hermes says, "On the land, on the sea, in good weather and bad weather, and with people and not with people, y- there is a supreme good which will always support you and can buoy you up." And like, wow, yeah. So, um, yeah. Uh, so I quoted that in the book. Yeah. Um, yeah.
We also have on YouTube, there's quite a few recordings, but one of them is also the origin story of MWIH, of the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. That that's a whole another couple hours, so we won't get into it, but it is kismet also. We've
Yeah.
had so much fortune and
Yeah.
been very fortuitous, I think is the word. And really quite amazing, me, you,
Yeah.
and John, my
Yeah.
husband, us working
Yeah.
together. We're the three amigos with all different, very differing but complementary traits.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say um that the Institute was more like a gleam in John's eye than it was in mine and probably even in yours. But you were like the perfect person. And I think you'd struggled to find a role in the world until then. And it's like, boom, and John actually sits back. He still kind of has the gleam. He can still kind of foresee how things should fit together, kind of certainly in a techie way, but also kind of a general how to run a business. He's a businessman. And and of course Tara knows some of that because she's married to him and she's studied it as well and studied and worked with him in his business. But I would never know how to run a business. My dad was a university professor, and it's like I always thought, oh, I'm going to be a university professor, and then it's like, oh, they don't want me. Like, well, to hell with you.
The
And then
stories weren't good enough for you anyways.
oh, no, and then although I feel at my dad's memorial, all these people were like they just loved him, like they connected with his soul. That was like they were friends. He was a teacher. He was an elder. He was a rock, a lighthouse, and on and on. And I'm thinking, sitting there, God, I'm like the introvert that hardly relates to anybody. I don't have any friends except, two in the city and one over there and another one,
My gosh, you've got friends all over the place.
well, my good friends, yeah, I do have friends, but they're all scattered. I don't have that sort of, I just don't have a community like that right in my neighborhood the way he did.
Oh,
And
yeah.
But I realized, oh, I inherited the storytelling from my dad. And we have at least one we have Kansas boyhood dog stories from him, which is just a great thing. And I think we might have another one, but at least we have that one. And I might gather up from my sister and niece some other stories that he's told. He finally got so old I couldn't get him to, he didn't feel like he could really carry the script or carry the memory for that long, although his memory was very good. So, yeah.
We have some really wonderful compliments in the chat here. I won't be able to read all of them, but uh, Pierce says, I'm very, very glad you're teaching, Matt. I'm so grateful and happy to keep learning from you.
Uh, thanks, Pierce. Yeah.
Lots of,
Met Pierce. So, and I'll be out in, oh, get in touch with Margie. I'll be teaching with her again that weekend, and I'll be teaching at Mushroom Thing in Maine. So,
that's a good point here. I was going to mention at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, if you go to the calendar, not only do we have our events that we're hosting, uh, when Matt, if you just look for this little airplane, see that little airplane? That says
oh,
Matt's teaching somewhere else.
yep.
And if
Oh,
you click
oh,
on that, you'll find the details.
yep.
And this is a tiny airplane also.
Yep.
Doesn't show up too well on the blue, but I should turn up
And
Portland.
17th and 18th, I'll be in Portland, Oregon. I gotta get you. I just got signed up for this kind of belatedly. Sean got me that gig. I will be teaching at a mushroom conference in
Okay.
Portland. I don't Maine mushroom something. Yeah. Which
Okay. Yep.
I'm excited about because I don't know that much about mushrooms. So, and I'll be talking about cancer because you put together 3 or 4 good herbs for cancer and 2 or 3 good mushrooms, and you got a lot more going on.
It's quite
Um,
an arsenal.
yeah.
Yeah, if you just have those.
Yep.
So check out our calendar. As when I hear about events that Matt's at, we'll put that on there so you also know where you can travel to see him. And we are still enrolling in the second cohort for the year one program. You can get a beautifully signed certificate by Matthew Wood to be a Matthew Wood certified herbalist.
Mhm.
And Matt's working on a very special certificate for this. I'm excited to see it.
Oh, well, yeah, I've got to work on it rather. Not that I have on it. We've
Um,
talked about it.
It is a super, super comprehensive program. I find that people who really want to dive deep, really want to go beyond. I mean, you'll learn first aid, you'll learn family herbalism, for example, but it goes so much deeper. Like Matt said, the first lessons are about logos and syllogism and logic and the using metaphor to describe and and that's quite a deep dive to start out with. So you're getting a taste of it here, and you'll you just have a deeper understanding of the plants and people and so many things when you grasp that. But it's throughout the curriculum. It's just absolutely amazing. It's really the best and best of the best of what Matt has to offer, and also guest teachers as
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
It's really astounding. There's too much to go into, really, but all the details are here. We have uh, we have extra classes with like Q&A sessions, study groups. We have game nights so that to help enrich your education as well. It is an online guided program, but you can go at your own pace. You have up to a year and a half to complete it, and it's guided. This version is guided for 6 months. It's an accelerated program, but if you need to stretch that out to a year, you can absolutely do that. And there are some absolutely amazing features to this program. This is actually on our new website, which will be launched here soon. Matt has a very special birthday coming up here in June, and we're going to be having a grand reopening of the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. And right now, I'm actually going to give you a sneak peek. Actually, Matt's getting a bit of a sneak peek right now, too.
Mm.
Let's see. Let me click here. Ta-da! So this is my profile. And each person will have their own profile when you log in. You can see that I'm a newbie, I'm a sprout, I'm a busy bee, and yay, I'm appreciated. Don't we all like that love and appreciation from others? And it's just a great place where you can keep track of your progress, the courses that you're enrolled in, and so forth. There's a number of features that are really social media like, the good ones, the ones that we like, right? Where it's all tied together. But we have an absolutely wonderful community. And speaking of community, here is a glimpse of that. Matt, you've even commented that people are even more interactive on this site,
Mhm.
and which is wonderful. That's definitely something that we strive to cultivate, is that community feel. And we have a private community for the year one program, and then also a greater community for just greater conversations as well as each course. So like social media, you can tag or mention someone and that shows up in your inbox. And you can just click in your inbox, go read your messages. It's all very integrated really, really nicely. And another feature, my favorite feature, actually, this is absolutely amazing. My favorite feature here is the index. I just chose that out of the menu here. We have a growing index that helps you because the programs and the website are so extensive. I mean, we have hundreds of documents at this point, hundreds of videos as well. And so it's just huge. We've been working on this site for a year now. That's how big it is. And so with that, we want to make it easy for you to use as well. And so what we've done is created this index. And hats off, Alberto's here tonight in the background, but big hats off to him. He's the one that actually has put this together and has been working on this. And so how this is categorized is you can look up by categories. We have herbs, conditions and symptoms, anatomy and physiology, herbal actions, tastes and tissue states, folk herbalism, astrological and alternative terms, preparations, supplements and substances, people, teachers and cultures. There's over 200 pages of the index, and it's not complete. So that's why there is, first of all, these categories is broken apart into sections. But let's say, for example, I want to look up an herb. Let's say I want to look up agrimony because I love agrimony, and it is an herb that has certainly served me, and I'm very, very grateful. And I see that in the year one program, it's mentioned a number of times, and maybe I've listened to it. And I was like, I want to reference back to this one class, and I think it was in the Southern Vervains and agrimony, and I just want to re-listen to it. When I click on that, so I just clicked on this, it takes me right to the website, to the very lesson to do my research. And so I might then, instead of listening to the whole thing, I might just want to search. See down here, I have a search bar. I just type in agrimony and it will highlight in yellow. Oh, you know what? Is this one that still says is acrimony? Oh, I should have tested this one. Yep, it's still acrimony. Alberto, we got to change that. But it still shows the function. So it's agrimony, folks, with a G, not a C.
So spell check did that to you, I think.
Yeah. And so very cool. What you can do then is you click on the highlighted word, and it will take you to that point in the video where the word is mentioned. So this is an absolutely amazing study tool. Whether you want to review, maybe you're doing research on a particular herb and you want to cross-reference on our site. It's absolutely incredible, as we have the whole year one program cataloged. So those of you who are in the year one program, you have an amazing research tool available to you, and it's expanding. We're working on these other categories. For example, the library, which is where The majority of our courses, you can access them for one very reasonable monthly fee. We have Real Spirit Journey, which is one of our courses that has been going on for years and just has tons of amazing content. We have individual courses, lots and lots of individual courses, and then Herbs A to Z, which was our first ongoing class, and again, has tons and tons of content. So this will be filled out very soon in the coming months. But in the year one program, you have full access to this. We have so many wonderful features of this new site. This is my favorite, and I think it's just absolutely amazing. Matt, that's your first time seeing it, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that is amazing. Yeah. I didn't
How your
really
eyes light up.
Yeah, yeah. And well, yeah, you're going to hear the same stories sometimes with agrimony. You could hear the same stories again and again. But I remember always when I was teaching, when I was just teaching, not even recording it in the 90s, early 2000s, my students would say, "Oh, but I've each time I hear the story, I learn something different." So that is that, even with some repetition, that's still good. Also, that was Phyllis there, who's a gem of a teacher, and we're bouncing things back and forth and constantly learning, actually. So I don't think I learn as much from anybody else while I'm teaching as Phyllis, certainly Sean some and some other, I mean, everybody I learned some from. Oh, I wanted to mention Sebastian. We're teaching a class on tongue diagnosis now. That's really an exciting move ahead. That's just getting our little toe in the water of what would you call it? Clinical or the third year stuff. We're not really developing that yet, but we couldn't hold back on it. He and I just love that subject so much that we had to get going with it. So yeah.
Well, stay tuned. You guys are getting a little bit of glimpse of what's to come. But like I said, in June, we're having a grand reopening. It's Matt's, what birthday, Matt? It's Matt's birthday.
7-0.
And your book is coming out the following July 2nd. And so just a very amazing time. And we'll have some really amazing things coming. Matt, we're already started the tongue evaluation. So that currently is just a bonus class in the library, but in June you'll have other options for attending, purchasing access to that. We're also starting up a case studies and advanced discussion option as well, where we'll have people presenting their case, we'll have people discussing cases, or just having advanced discussion. Maybe someone's bringing a case. So it'll have quite a variety of dynamics there, and options to join Q&As, more events. We just have tons of stuff that we're super excited about and can hardly wait. I just want to like reveal it all now, but it's not quite ready. Very soon. Oh yeah, it's the tongue evaluation is ongoing at this point. It has no end date. It's just once a month. If you're part of the library right now, it's included in the library. And so again, we just have lots of praise, Matt. Angela says, "Thank you, Matthew, for your lifelong wisdom and teaching us." Angela in Minnesota.
Okay. And let's see, I'd like to show the picture of me and he who must not be named. Um, so he would be the next great mentor, but we learned from each other actually. Um, uh, so he was friend slash enemy slash mentor. And um, do we have that picture? Yeah, there we are. That was in Batesville. There's a younger me. There he is. And on a beautiful day in the out in the field there. Yeah. So there's a few other pictures we may work in and for when we edit this. I'll try to get you some more pictures, but
Yeah, we're getting requests for part two, so it might just need to be a part of part two as well.
yeah, I could talk a little bit more about I kind of got up to working at present moment and um less of my private practice and so on. But you have lots of other herbalists to interview, so yeah. So,
Oh, always love hearing from you, and you're always welcome back, Matt.
yep.
So, if unless you have something else that you'd like to end with, should
No. Yeah, I mean, any more questions that are worth it, or nah, those questions aren't worth it. No.
we? Well, there's always plenty.
Oh, that's-
This might be a good one to end with. The mystical experience that led Matthew onto the path, was that the revelation that nature was alive or something else?
No, that was that nature is alive. Yeah, right,
A
right.
good one to
So,
clarifying.
yeah, yeah. So,
Well, thank
okay.
you for joining us. Those of you who are on YouTube, also make sure to like, subscribe, share with a friend who you think would might enjoy this as well.
Yeah.
And have a great night, great day wherever you are.
Yep. All right. We'll
Here,
see ya.
thank you for the kind words.
Bye.
Bye. I'll stick around here for a few moments in case any of you have any questions as well that I might be able to help you with. Otherwise, thanks again for all your kind words. That is wonderful. I'll make sure we'll get to this chat to Matt as well so he can read all of your kind words as well. We really appreciate it. Wonderful. Well, I hope you're all having beautiful weather where you're all from. The plants and the sun are shining. And good to see you all virtually as always. And as always, too, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at hello@woodherbs.com. We're very happy to help you out there. And just make sure I didn't miss anything. But yeah, I think I covered all the main points there. Thank you so much, Petronella.